Hello and welcome to my kitchen. I'm Embroidery and I'm one of the artists working on the Derwent Delights project. Derwent Delights project is a project that is celebrating the attributes of the World Heritage Site here at Derwent Valley. And it comprises of a geocaching project, which is ornate metal cabinets with textile sculptures in them, along with books of poetry. Now, because of the pandemic, other aspects of the project have had to be changed. So one of them was to make textile book covers. Now, we've not been able to do that, so instead we're making a banner. And I've got here a rough design of the banner, and I'll explain how your part of the project fits into this banner. Here we have a rough drawing of the banner. It's in 5 parts because there are 5 geocaches, 5 cupboards, 5 sculptures, and sometimes they'll be exhibited all together and sometimes they will be separate. So the banner is in 5 parts. And the idea is that it looks like a cross-section of a geological strata, but at the bottom here we have the river, and the river is going to be made by a group using rope making techniques. So they're going to make ropes like this, bigger than this, but they will go around there. The second layer is representing the natural environment and how that and the machines have combined. So that's going to be a selection of cog flowers going along there in different colours. And then we have a layer that is here, that is a dry stone wall, and that is done in needle felting to make stones to needle felted, and they'll go all the way across. Then we have another nature machine one, and that's going to be done with applique cogs going all the way across. They'll look like trees or bushes or machines, a combination of the two. And then at the top we have the mill buildings, and these are done in a series of patchwork. Now, we don't know exactly what any of this is going to look like until all the pieces are in, but the windows on these will be done as reflections of the river by using embroidery. Now, the embroidery stitches are the same ones that were used on sock manufacture in this area. The rope making techniques reference the plying and spinning in this area. So altogether, lots of different people's work will come together to make this one banner. Hello, my name's Embroidery and I'm an artist working on the Derwent Delights project, which is a project that celebrates the Derwent Heritage Valley and brings a focus onto the nature of the valley, the buildings, all the attributes of innovation, the people's stories. And we're doing this through sculpture, through writing and through textiles. And this today is part of a banner project which is specifically for the Gold Squad at Quad. And if you should already have done the Zoom session, and in that Zoom session we assembled the fabric ready to start embroidery, and then I'm going to show you that again quickly. Then we will do the some of the stitches that you can use to go on to the piece of fabric. So in the Zoom session you should have had your piece of fabric from your kit. You will have cut some, you will have written on it. First of all, you will have drawn 3 lines. Remember, they have to extend, everything we do has to extend beyond these 2 vertical lines because they're the seam lines for when your piece of fabric goes into the patchwork banner, and you will have written words about the river on those. Really small. And then you will have cut pieces of dress nets in different colours into wavy lines. I'm going to place those on. Saving the light blue till last. So this just builds up a depth of colour. There's on top. And then we trap all of those with the big sheet of the palest blue, like that. Pin it together and then use running stitch to hold those in place. And I'll show you the stitches now. To do all the sewing, we're going to be using embroidery thread. Lots of people call this embroidery silk, but stranded cotton. It's not made of silk, and you don't want too long a length because it will get knotted up. Only use the colours I've provided in the pack, that way the entire thing will have a cohesive look to it. So then when we've got our threads, we separate two out, and very gently, with lots of space, we let them come apart like that. Now, an important thing is, once you've done that, is to let this one spin to get all the twist out of it, because if you don't, when you come to sew, you will end up with lots of little knots. So I'm going to presume that you don't know anything about embroidery at all, and I'm going to start with very basics. The first stitch is running stitch, and I'm doing this on the scrap of fabric. There are two ways of doing running stitch. One is a passive needle, so your needle stays still and you move the fabric up and down. This is the way that you would sew in if you were doing Indian embroidery, where you need to do a lot very quickly, or indeed how Victorian maids would do the seams on linen, and then you pull that through. So the needle wasn't constantly leaving your hand, like that. Okay. In Africa, some parts of Africa, this is called night and day stitch because it has half as much time in the light as in the dark. So the other way of doing it is where you would just pick up a single piece or maybe two pieces and pull the thread through each time. This is active needle because your needle is moving each time. Okay. Now the rest of the sewing I'm going to do on a tambour ring or an embroidery ring, so that you can see it better in the camera. But you don't need to put your work in to the embroidery ring to do the project we're doing. It will be fine with these stitches just out of the ring. So here we have our bit of running stitch. The names I'm using are all the ones described by Louisa Pessel in the beginning of the 20th century, rather than something I've made up. Now we can change this into Holbein stitch, which is a stitch usually used in countered thread work or black work, by going back and doing another set of running stitches to fill in the gaps, so it will then become a solid line. Now, technically you should come up one side of the stitch and then the opposite side on there, so it gives a very slight diagonal because you're using the same hole as you did before. So, but we're not bothered about that. In effect, this is looks very much like a back stitch or an upside down back stitch. All stitches are related, and I call this my theory of stitch relativity. So we've got this one. So that's double running or whole bind stitch. Now, there are other things we can do with the running stitch. We can whip it or we can interlace it. And I'll show you how to do those next. So we have our line of double running stitch or whole bind stitch, and I've done 2 lines of running stitch. We can whip one and we will interlace the other. And to whip, we're going to bring a contrasting thread up to the top, and then it goes underneath the underneath the stitch. We're not going through the fabric again. This is good for using thicker threads, so you could use a thicker thread but on top. Now it will give this ropey effect. Your needle always goes from the same side of the stitching, so it's this. I'm always going from the bottom. Whipped running stitch. And this next one we're going to interlace, and the only difference is that instead of always going from the same side, we go from alternate sides. So it goes from this side and through that side. And this gives a much more wavy line. And if you're using a thick thread, sometimes it stays in real curves like that. But because this is... Don't pull it too tight. Excellent. The next stitch we're going to do is a buttonhole or blanket stitch. Technically, buttonhole stitches stitch closer together and blanket stitches farther apart. Both can be worked on the edge of fabric, but the only real difference is how close together they are. So imagine the line you're going at, and the needle always stays at right angles to that. So it goes, pick up a little bit. I'll do it this way. Make sure it goes over the thread. Carry on your line. Pick up a small amount. There's no need for this to be, the legs could be even or not. They can be close together or far apart. The baseline can be straight or wobbly. It makes no difference. It's still a buttonhole stitch. So that's with the needle just on one side. You can do alternate buttonhole stitch by doing one stitch that side and then one this side. If instead of keeping this line here straight, we did it in a zigzag and then did another row, that would create honeycomb stitch where we get hexagons. So the next stitch is going to be herringbone, and you can work it either open or closed. So you work towards your one herringbone. So you come up, imagine two lines, needle pointing away, cross over, needle always points away. This is my favourite stitch, it's very quick. You can get wider and narrower, you can have them, they can be random lengths. The final stitch that we're going to do is related to buttonhole stitch, and it is a double fern stitch. Now all of these stitches that we're using used to be used to embroider the socks that were manufactured in the Derwent Valley. They're called chevening, which is where you stitch patterns on the ankle seams of the socks, originally to fasten the ankle seams together and later just as decoration. So this looks like buttonhole. It's two little fly stitches also, it's got another name for that. But we're now going to, we've gone that way, we're going to go this way now. Again, then this time the needle always points away from you. It's quite difficult for me to do it and hold it facing away from me. This way. I like this one. Victorians use this a lot in crazy patchwork to cover the applique seams in crazy patchwork, because it's not really patchwork, it's applique. Needle points away, make sure your threads, when you come up, that the thread is underneath it. Obviously I've just used orange so that you can see. Yours will always be all be in blues and greys and silvers. When our piece of stitching is finished, it should look a bit like this. It will be the layers with various stitching across it. Don't worry about the edges, because when it's sewn in they will be turned under like that. goes into a patchwork of river and buildings. So it will look like it's flowing across the piece of work.